Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth. Hello and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast. My name is Grace Evans and I am not here with my co-host today, Moses Brattrud. He is actually at a speaking event, super exciting speaking event for actually a club on campus at one of our local universities here in Minnesota. So it's just me today and we have a bit of an unconventional podcast episode for you in that I will not be breaking down some news stories. Instead, I really wanted to give you guys a deep dive into a talk that I sometimes give. Now, I've done this before in the podcast where I kind of give a presentation, but in podcast format, and it's always on life. And you guys have found that really interesting before and really helpful. And so I wanted to do that again. So we are going to be talking about how we can be a pro-lifer in a pro-abortion state. That is the main topic of today's podcast. And before I jump into that, I just want to give a little bit of background to me, my story, for those of you that haven't heard it, how I became actively pro-life, and just a little bit behind the scenes of how this talk came to be. So first off, I was always pro-life, so to speak. I always would call myself pro-life. I was raised in a Christian pro-life household. And it wasn't until 2019, so my senior year of high school, that I became really actively pro-life. I would say that I was pretty passive beforehand because I would say I was pro-life, but I wouldn't really go and do anything about it. And I know a lot of people can relate to that. And I think there's usually a catalyst in our lives that sparks us into action, that triggers us. And then we go off and do these things for life, fighting in this movement. And so for me, that was in 2019 when New York City lit up its skyscrapers in blue and pink, so in baby colors. Why did they do that? Well, they did it to celebrate the legalization of abortion up to the moment of birth. So that's just heartbreaking. They were using baby colors to celebrate baby murder. So when that happened, I saw that all over social media, and I immediately was heartbroken. And before, I had never known how pervasive abortion really was. I knew that some people applauded it, but I didn't know that so many people celebrated it, especially in my generation. And so a trigger kind of went off in my brain, and I knew that I would dedicate my life to this movement. So fast forward years, now I work for Minnesota Family Council and travel the state to speak on this issue and inspire people to engage in life. So when I was in college, I actually started, as part of my pro-life work, I started a pro-life club, and it's still going strong to this day. It's thriving. So I was the president and founder, and in that club, I would just give various talks, and my final talk that I gave was on what I've learned in the fight for life. So it was me looking over the past 4 years of activism, 4.5 years of activism, and seeing what are some things I've learned? What are some things that I think would really inspire these young people who are ready to rise up against this great injustice? And so what I'm about to share with you is really a collection of my thoughts on the fight for life. And I know that there'll be a lot more for me to learn in the coming years. I look at amazing pro-life figures like Lila Rose, who I look up to so much. And I just think, wow, I aspire to do that for life. And I would love to look back in 5, 10, 20 years and think I was on the front lines fighting this injustice. And I hope you guys will join me. And I hope that this podcast will give you some really easy tools of how you can be pro-life in Minnesota when our legislation is trending very pro-abortion. So without further ado, here is some of the things that I have learned in the fight for life. The first thing, and a lot of this talk is inspired by things I've learned from Abigail Dodds, things I've learned from Joe Rigney. So wanted to give that disclaimer because they are awesome. But the first thing that we can do as pro-lifers is we need to remember that we can win the battle for life if we patiently play the long game. Now, for those of us in Minnesota, it could be pretty depressing. Looking out of last session, 2023 session, and all of the terrible pro-abortion legislation that was passed. We had the PRO Act pass, which we've unpacked here on the podcast before. And some pregnancy resources centers were defunded. Their annual funding, some of their funding from the state, they were defunded. And so we can look at that and think, wow, we're losing some battles here. But we need to keep the big picture in mind. We need to play the long game as Christians. And so when we play that long game, that is when we win. Now, it may take us 50 years of faithfulness like it did with Roe v. Wade, but I know that God will bring victory in the end. That's just exactly what happened with Roe v. Wade. And when you think about Roe, we, and when I say we, I mean we Minnesotans, but also we Americans, and those of us that have been in the fight for 40 years, not just those that are young among us like myself, but we didn't simply overturn Roe. With God's strength, we actually beat it with a baseball bat. And so we need to think about this, you guys. It was America who legalized abortion up to 40 weeks. That was us. That was our bad. All the countries of the world were watching us as we did it, and they took our cues and followed our lead. It was us who spread it across the globe. But it was America who, after 50 years of violence, overturned Roe v. Wade, and we sent shockwaves across the entire nation. Just think about that. I often think on William Wilberforce's testimony, his life, his legacy, and how he fought his entire life to eradicate slavery. And it wasn't even until his deathbed that he got the news that he had actually won his victory. And year after year, he would bring this legislation to Parliament and say, we need to pass this legislation. We need to end slavery. And he would try to whip votes, and he would try to convince Parliament members. And he succeeded in convincing Parliament members. He succeeded. But every year, with each success, he still didn't pass that legislation until his deathbed. That's when he got word of it. And so I think we can take great hope and great inspiration from William Wilberforce that it may take us 50 years. It may take us our lifetime. It may take us into our grandchildren's lifetime, but we know that we will win in the end. We will be victorious. The church will prevail. So that has been an encouragement to me in the fight for life. The second thing that I think we as pro-lifers need to recognize when we're living in a very pro-abortion state is that we ought to act like prayer is the most powerful weapon we have. Why? Because it is. And I think that's easily overlooked. It's easy for those of us that are in more of the political arena when it comes to advocating for life and advocating in this movement. It's easy for us to look over at the more prayerful side of the movement, the sidewalk counselors, and think, oh, that's just a spiritual side, but we're over here doing this political action. Well, actually, we need both. Prayer is the most powerful tool we have. Every pro-lifer should be praying. And sidewalk counselors are so powerful. It makes me think of 2 Corinthians 10:4-5, which reads, "For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take everything captive to obey Christ." Now, I think that is just a great reminder that this war that we're fighting, this is a cosmic war. It's not a battle merely of flesh and blood. There are spiritual forces at work. And while we must push for the right legislation because we care about the kingdom of God, we must not forget that prayer is our most powerful weapon. So continue to pray boldly. The third thing that I have learned in the fight for life is that we won't be able to win the culture war on the other issues, say on gender, on marriage. We're not going to be able to win on those things unless we first help our culture understand what it means to be human. That at its very core is what this is all about. We can't even define, our culture can't even define what it means to be a human, why humans have value, and from that stems all of our other issues. Because when we understand what a human is and why it has value and the importance of the Imago Dei, then we understand the importance of gender. Then we understand the importance of who God made us to be in his own image. So making sure that we focus on this issue is of the utmost importance. We need to fight on the other issues. Absolutely. They are so important, but we're not going to turn the tides unless we help our culture understand what it means to be human. And we're not going to be able to change legislation until we change hearts and minds. And that is our job right now. The fourth thing that I have learned in the fight for life, and the fourth thing that I think that we as pro-lifers in a pro-abortion state really can recognize, especially after a session where things looked very bleak, is we need to remember that faithfulness is always required of us, regardless of if the outcome looks bleak, because faithfulness is never futile. And this goes hand in hand with my first point. But regardless of what the outcome looks like in our lifetime, we're required to be faithful. We are required that. And so I think there's a good question that I often ask myself, and I think maybe it would help you guys to ask yourselves it. But the question is, would I still be faithful at my post if I wouldn't see the payback for generations? Would I? Would I still be faithful? Or am I in this because I want success? Am I in this because I want to win? And of course we want to win, but am I only in this so that I can see that fruit, so I can see that result? And it can be disheartening to see setbacks. It can be disheartening to lose in your lifetime, but we need to keep the long game in mind. And, we don't choose the times in which we live in. We do choose, however, what to do with the time that has been given to us. And it's very similar to what Gandalf, I think he says to Frodo in Lord of the Rings. But, we need to choose what to do with what has been given to us. We wouldn't choose to have that ring of power and have to deal with that, but we're given that and we have to deal with that. So in our circumstance, we wouldn't choose to live in a nation where abortion is legal, but we do live in that circumstance. Therefore, we must do our best and be faithful with the time we've been given. And so what do we choose? We choose to welcome every child as the gift of God that they truly are. We choose to support women facing unplanned pregnancies with compassion, with resources, and we choose to start a cultural reformation in our own homes. And I think that is sometimes overlooked, that we can reform culture from the inside out. That is an important part of it. When we have kids, when we raise them to love God, when we love our husbands, when we love our wives, that is starting a reformation that sparks the importance of life, humanity, marriage, family, and that trickles into every aspect of life. But it starts in the home. So on that note, my next point is that if we want to change the culture, we must build a more beautiful culture that the opposition just can't help but want to join. So if we're saying this is what we want, we want to get rid of abortion laws, well, we better have an alternative that looks a lot more beautiful to the opposition. So what does that look like? What would look beautiful to the people that are pushing abortion legislation? Well, it would look like a lot of support for women in need. Now, do we have a lot of that already? Absolutely. But do we have a lot of way to go? Absolutely. So we have great pregnancy resource centers that are the hands and feet of the movement. They are the Marines of the pro-life movement. And I'm so grateful for pregnancy resource centers because they provide women with the life-affirming resources that they deserve and need. And so they're awesome. They provide post-abortive care for women who have undergone abortions. They provide parenting classes for women. They provide supplies for women, ultrasounds, prenatal care, postpartum care, so much of this and more. And we just need more of that. We need more of that. We need even more support for single mothers. We need to build a culture where no woman would ever think to get an abortion because she feels so loved and supported that abortion isn't even a thought that crosses her mind. That is the kind of culture that we are building as a pro-life movement and that we will continue to build. Now, if you're a mom sitting at home or a kid sitting at home and you're thinking that is inspiring, but I don't have the skill set to push this kind of legislation that you're talking about, Grace, or I am not gifted in that way. I am not the activist type. I don't want to go speak at rallies, but I want to do something. Well, I have a response for you. I am just a girl who cares. I don't have a super inspiring story in that, I thought of choosing abortion, but then I didn't, or I'm an abortion survivor, or any of those things. But what I am is I am a girl who cares, and I care so deeply about this. And if you care deeply, you can make a difference. Now, that doesn't mean that your pro-life involvement is going to look exactly like mine, because we all have different gifts and we're all part of the body of Christ. So I think of this quote from an essay called Culture Making, and it states, "What is needed most in our time is Christians who are deeply serious about cultivating and creating." but who wear that seriousness lightly. Those who are not desperately trying to change the world, but who also wake up every morning eager to create. And I think that's a beautiful reminder to what we are talking about building that beautiful culture. Is it can be easy to be doom and gloom when it comes to abortion, and we need to teach those around us about the gravity of this situation. But we don't want to live in fear or fear-mongering. We don't want to build people up in fear. We don't want to be depressing. As Christians, we should be the most joyful people in the entire room. We need to be the most joyful people that anyone encounters on the day-to-day basis. We need to wake up every morning eager to innovate. And that really is our job as pro-lifers in a state that's trending pro-abortion. We need to innovate. We need to get creative, because how we are going to act pro-life in our state is going to differ from how Sally would act pro-life in Alabama, right? In very pro-life states, it's going to look a lot different than in a state like Minnesota. And so we need to really just be innovative. We need to educate ourselves. We need to think, how can we win in our state? How can we win against the abortion industry? What kind of regulations is Planned Parenthood really just discarding? What regulations is Planned Parenthood discarding? How can we really bring that to light? How can we shut them down? How can we decrease the need for any woman to get an abortion and go to a Planned Parenthood? Because if you can cut the need, you can completely cut out the business. Or how do we make people understand? How do we totally cut the employees? Like, if no one wanted to perform an abortion or be part of an abortion, abortions wouldn't happen. If no woman and no man was willing to perform an abortion, abortions would not exist. And so it's having these conversations that changes hearts and minds. Let's cut the supply, let's cut the demand. That is exactly what we should be doing. But we need to be innovative about that. And I can get more into that in a different podcast episode. But really innovate. There's a book I read in college called That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis. And it beautifully illustrates what I'm trying to get at here. This quote comes after a long war that the characters have been fighting. And these characters have fought long and hard. They've been faithful. And one of these characters that fought the war said, "I'd be greatly obliged if anyone would tell me what we've done, always apart from feeding the pigs and raising some very decent vegetables." And the leader responds, "You have done what was required of you. You have obeyed and waited. It will often happen like that." And, I think that's our job. Our job is to obey and wait. Now, don't let that sound passive to you. Obeying looks like acting on our pro-life beliefs, acting on our pro-life convictions, turning those beliefs into action. That is what obedience looks like. But then we wait. We obey and we wait. We don't expect result like that, because that actually sometimes happens, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think that when we're faithful in these small things that I've outlined, God blesses us. Each of us, everyone listening, myself included, we're each like a little drop of water on our own. But when we're all moving in the same direction, when we're all moving in unity, we are like a huge tidal wave that is pushed by the wind of the Spirit. And we have the power of a huge tidal wave when we all work together. So that analogy that I just used reminds me of a Mother Teresa quote, actually. She says that she alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the water to create many ripples. So similar analogy there. The sixth thing that I have learned in the fight for life, the sixth thing that we should remember in our pro-abortion state, is that apathy is one of our greatest enemies. It's easy in the aftermath of something like Roe v. Wade being overturned to think, that was awesome, but what do we do now? I can't really do anything in our state. Look at Minnesota. Things are bad. That's what's easy to do. But really, our job right now is to not be apathetic. Our job is to keep that pressure on. We need to keep the pressure on the abortion industry. We will never back down. We will teach our kids how to fight, and we will fight with them. And that reminds me of a Bonhoeffer quote. He says, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." And that gets at the root of what I'm saying. He continues in another quote that Christianity stands or falls with its revolutionary protest against violence. Christians are doing too little to make these points clear rather than too much. Christians should give more to offense, shock the world far more than they are doing now. Christians should take a stronger stand in favor of the weak. Now, I think that's a great point here because a lot of the pro-abortion activists take their rules from the handbook of Saul Alinsky, who wrote Rules for Radicals. And it's very clear, and many commentators have commented on this, but it's very clear that something that progressives are really good at is they're really good at organizing and activating and being that kind of an activist. They're good at being on the offensive, I should say. They're really good at putting us on defense, at attacking us, and shocking us with their bold accusations, their bold claims. Now, obviously they're wrong, but I think that we need to take a stronger stand, just like Bonhoeffer said. I think that we need to play offense as well as defense. I think we lose when we're just playing defense. We need to go into the enemy's territory and take back dominion. So if that looks like tightening up restrictions for abortion facilities, it looks like that. It could look like something as small or as big as that. And I think that when we take a stronger stand, like Bonhoeffer said, that's when we win. When we play offense, we win. Moving on to our next point about what we can really do here in our state is, well, we can inform people of the truth. We can inform them and really speak the truth boldly that there is no gray area when it comes to abortion. In our state, we need to make it crystal clear that there is zero room for compromise. Zero room. Because we see that a lot with certain politicians. We see it everywhere. We see them compromise. We see them say, well, we support life at X stage, but not at Z stage. Now, we take every piece of pro-life legislation as a win, but ultimately there is zero gray area. And again, why is that? Well, it's because this isn't primarily, I should say, a political battle. It's ultimately a moral one. It's a moral battle between cosmic powers that has become a political battle. So this is a spiritual war of darkness versus light. That is why there is no gray area. And for every inch we give, they will take a mile. So what we need to do, what can we do against this? How can we win when there is truly no gray area in abortion? Well, we can play the game on our own turf. Let's not let the opposition distract us by confusing analogies, weird situations, all of these different things they can confuse us with. They can confuse us with the wording they use. So let's play the game on our own turf. Let us make them explain what a baby is, what a human is, because they refuse to define what a baby is. And most of them can't define what a human is. But when they do, you beg the question, well, why is a baby not a human? So make them define their terms. And ultimately, when it comes to this, you need to remember that you always have the upper hand in a conversation because the most pro-abortion family in America gets excited for a wanted pregnancy. That's just the truth. So we will win. We are on the right side of history here. The next thing that we can remember as pro-lifers in our state is that, and something that we can speak the truth on, is that the liberation of women can't be bought by the blood of our children. Now, how do we live that out in our day-to-day life? Well, one thing is for those of you that are mothers, it is by living for your children, sacrificing for your children, living each day, treating them like a precious gift like they are, laying your life down for them, for your husband, not complaining about your children. That is something that is so often happens in mom culture, unfortunately. So we proclaim this truth that women will not be made free by the blood of our children because, it's really, truly terrible. Our culture sees pregnancy as parasitic. It sees motherhood as the greatest hindrance. And you and I, especially as women, our job is to show the world that women don't have to choose between their children and their dreams, that actually our children can be our greatest dream. We can show the world that we can show Minnesota that our children are worthy of life. They are not objects to be discarded. Ultimately, we just must remember that killing our children brings despair and God's judgment. It doesn't fulfill us. But laying our lives down for our children does fulfill us. Laying our lives down for others does. The next thing that we can proclaim in a pro-abortion state, the next thing that I have learned in the fight for life is that women deserve so much better than abortion. And I've talked about this before, but it's just because it's so true. And it's something that everyone should be aware of on the podcast. Here are 4 reasons why women deserve better than abortion, you guys. First of all, the abortion industry aids sex trafficking. You heard that right. Abortion providers have been caught on camera blatantly stating their willingness to cover up sex trafficking in their own clinics and even to aid them. And so that's just terrible. And so when I talked about innovating in your pro-abortion state, this is something that you can really help with. You can advocate for laws that tighten up things on sex trafficking, that make the penalties for sex trafficking that much worse. You can make reporting regulations that much tighter in abortion providers. Another reason why women deserve better than abortion is because it's never safe for a woman. After undergoing abortion, women are far more likely to commit suicide, to be hospitalized, to hemorrhage, which is bleeding out, even to die. And so abortion isn't safe for them physically, but it's also not safe for them mentally either. I mean, it traumatizes them. The next reason that women deserve better than abortion is because the abortion industry lies to women. They provide to claim so many services besides abortion. They say that they provide prenatal services, pap tests, mammograms, et cetera, but in reality, abortion is the vast majority, of what they do. They say they provide all of these services, but in the end, they're an abortion provider because they are bent on making money, and abortion is their biggest money maker. So in line with that, the next reason that women deserve better than abortion is because these abortion providers pressure women to abort because it is honestly so heartbreaking. They pressure them because they can make the most money. And how do they do this? They actually have monthly quotas. Some of these abortion providers have monthly quotas where they keep their cash flow. And sometimes they have like pizza parties to celebrate or incentivize that, which is truly so sad because women should be supported to choose life, not pressured into the murder of her precious child. The last thing, actually, the second to last thing that I think that we need to remember in our state and fight for life in our state is that we don't know how every chapter ends, but or we don't know every chapter is what I'm trying to say. We don't know this chapter, that chapter, but what we do know is how the story ends. And how the story ends is that God wins. God wins. And that is a beautiful, beautiful thing to remember. It is beautiful to remember that we're on the side of hope, compassion, truth, science, love, peace, justice, basic human rights. We have everything going for us. They have nothing going for them. On top of that whole list of things that I just listed, we also have God on our side. There's this quote, and I'm forgetting who said it, but it's yesterday is gone, tomorrow has not yet come. We have only today. Let us begin. And I think that is a beautiful reminder of, okay, we don't know what the future will bring. We don't know how everything will happen, but we do know that we will win in the end. Galatians 6:9 says, "Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up." And that really is our job. Our job is to not give up. Don't give up. Be faithful at your posts. And there's one more verse I want to read for you that I'm pulling up right now as we speak. And it's such a good one, you guys. So I want to end on that. Here we go. 1 Corinthians 15:58. It says, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." And I just think, wow, it is so encouraging to me to think that everything that I do today will not be in vain because it's all in God's hands. In Ecclesiastes, it talks about how it's easy for those of us here on earth to think, wow, we're working so hard, and at the end of the day, someone random will inherit that earth or that work. Someone random will inherit that work. And are they going to be faithful with the work that we've started? Well, that's not for us to worry about because we know that God will bring our labor abundantly into fruit, that our labor is never in vain when it is for the Lord. So those are the key points that I really wanted to make today. So in conclusion, for those of you listening, we are in a state that leans pro-abortion. We absolutely are. So here's what we need to do. We need to keep the pressure on. So we need to educate ourselves. We need to educate our families, educate our friends. We need to speak up about the truth of abortion and the truth of and hope of life. And we need to keep the pressure on at all costs. We must be faithful at our posts, whatever that looks like, whatever we are called to. We need to be faithful there. And ultimately, we can take heart in the fact that God's justice never sleeps. Never sleeps. And there are those that are asleep in our legislature, in our state, but God's justice never sleeps. And so we, in our homes, in our workplaces, in our bubbles, we will fight apathy. We will build a cultural reformation in our city and in our state that it so desperately needs. And we'll do that through our words and our actions. And together, we will build a Minnesota where life is so cherished and women are so supported that abortion is never even a thought that crosses their minds. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Family Beacon podcast. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure you share this episode with your friends, especially your Minnesota friends, because this here are some really helpful reflections for you if you live in a pro-abortion state. And if you are feeling discouraged, I think this podcast would be so beneficial. So share that with your friends that live in pro-abortion states. Share this with your friends in Minnesota. Make sure you subscribe, and if you're listening on any platform, be aware that we actually have this on YouTube every single week as well, so you can watch it. So make sure you come back next Friday because we have new episodes every Friday, and again, we usually cover the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. I'll see you next week. We'll get the facts and stand for truth. Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.